what if the greatest danger is not losing everything at once, but losing it little by little, believing you are still in control? This biblical story reveals a deep spiritual warning about self-confidence, boundaries, and vigilance in faith. There is a kind of strength that begins as a virtue, but slowly turns into a trap. Not because someone wants to fail, but because they become accustomed to winning. When things have always worked out, caution fades, boundaries become flexible, and danger feels too distant to be threatening. It is at this point that many people begin to lose their way without realizing it, not because of weakness, but because of excessive confidence. Perhaps you have seen this happen, or even lived through something similar. Capable people, admired people, who solve problems, carry crises, and always find a way out. Little by little, they begin to believe that a history of victories is a permanent guarantee. "I can handle it" becomes the rule, not the exception. And when that happens, risk stops being external and begins to live within their own choices. Here, you will find biblical stories explained in depth to be applied to real life. This story will teach you something that almost no one talks about strength. It will surprise you because it does not begin with defeat, but with success. And the end of this journey reveals something transformative: how someone so strong can fall without noticing and still find purpose in the end. This is not a story about obvious weakness. It is about self-confidence without vigilance. This man was Samson. He was born in Israel, set apart from the womb by a vow made between his mother and God, as described in Judges 13:4-5. His strength did not come from training or strategy, but from a living covenant. He was not allowed to cut his hair, an external sign of consecration and active commitment to God. He was not allowed to consume strong drink, representing sobriety, self-control, and separation. He was also forbidden to touch anything dead, because his life was called to preserve what produces life, not what corrupts it. Samson became feared, defeated enemies alone, and seemed untouchable. But he began to trust the gift more than the covenant, and allowed himself to be led by Delilah, believing his strength would save him from any consequence. And this is exactly where the first block of this narrative begins, when his boundaries start to become a game, when you begin to play with boundaries. In Judges 14:1-3, Samson begins to involve himself with people and environments that completely ignore his calling. He sees, desires, and decides, even knowing that this path did not preserve his consecration. The text shows a moment in which God is silent, not because he approved, but because Samson already knew the boundaries. There is no immediate rupture, only repeated concessions. The fall does not begin in the abyss. It begins with permission. In everyday life, this happens when someone starts to play with what weakens them, believing that it's not a big deal. Small deviations become normalized until the conscience grows tired of believing that boundaries still matter. This biblical encouragement reminds us that God still sees you, even when choices seem too small to worry about. Every biblical story for broken people teaches that daily vigilance protects the future. And when something has begun to feel too normal, what is that revealing about the boundaries you stopped guarding? Victories that feed the ego. In Judges 14:5-6, Samson faces the lion and defeats it with ease, displaying a strength that impresses and intimidates. The problem is that the victory does not produce a change of direction or a shift in posture. The text shows that even while God is still at work, Samson continues repeating patterns that place his calling at risk when he returns to the place and touches the dead animal, directly breaking the vow not to touch anything dead. The conquest becomes fuel for the ego, not for maturity. The gift keeps operating, but character does not keep the same pace. In everyday life, this looks like results that hide internal failures, while a person slowly loses faith in the importance of self-examination. Applause soothes the conscience for a while, but it does not correct excesses or protect the future. This reveals that God still sees you beyond visible success. Frequent victories can numb the conscience and create the illusion that everything is under control. And when everything looks right on the outside, what still needs to be examined on the inside before the cost appears? When your strength becomes an excuse for recklessness. In Judges 16:1, Samson enters Gaza and exposes himself to a hostile environment, convinced that he would always escape. The strength that once delivered him in battles now sustains reckless decisions, while God remains silent in the face of imprudence. The text does not describe an isolated mistake, but a pattern of exaggerated confidence in his own track record. Samson confuses past deliverance with present permission. The narrative shows that gifts do not replace discernment. In everyday life, many people follow the same reasoning. I can handle it. It's different with me, until the cost appears. Like driving fast while trusting only in skill, the sense of control grows as the risk increases, leaving the heart spiritually exhausted without noticing. This biblical encouragement reminds us that God still sees you, even when self-confidence turns into self-sabotage. Strength is not a license for carelessness. And when success begins to justify dangerous choices, who pulls the brake before the impact? Samson repeatedly placed himself in environments where his vow was not protected. The danger of revealing what should be guarded. In Judges 16:4-17, Samson becomes involved with Delilah and gradually begins to expose what he should have protected. He plays with boundaries, confuses closeness with care, and ignores clear warning signs, even when God does not respond to his inner alerts. The text shows a sequence of choices in which trust is given to someone who does not preserve it. Samson does not lose his strength all at once. He gives it away little by little. Imprudence is born more from familiarity than from explicit malice. In everyday life, many people find themselves feeling distant from God after trusting secrets, weaknesses, and plans to those who do not know how to guard them. It is like handing the keys of your own house to someone who does not take care of it, believing everything will be fine. This biblical encouragement reminds us that God works in silence, even trying to protect before the fall. There is also a biblical story for broken people that teaches about healthy boundaries and emotional discernment. And the question that prepares the next step remains: who have you been telling what should be protected more carefully? When strength fades and you do not even notice. In Judges 16:18-20, Samson reveals everything to Delilah, and upon waking, believes nothing has changed. He tries to react as before, confident in the past, unaware that something essential has already been lost. The text presents a delicate moment in which God is still at work, even when the human heart does not perceive the gradual distance. Strength does not disappear abruptly. It drains away, while routine continues unchanged. Samson confuses habit with presence and reacts as if yesterday were still intact. In everyday life, this resembles a device that slowly loses battery. No one notices at first, until the power is completely gone. Sensitivity decreases, inner life weakens, and the person keeps moving forward, living a faith without answers, unaware of the where. These biblical stories that heal remind us that God has not left, even when perception fails. Self-sabotage is usually silent, growing day by day. And how can the signs be recognized before strength disappears entirely? The bottom as a place of clarity. In Judges 16:21 to 22, Samson is captured, humiliated, and stripped of freedom, experiencing deep spiritual pain after trusting his own impulse. Imprisoned and exposed, he no longer controls the situation or impresses anyone. The text shows that while everything seemed lost, something subtle began to change. His hair starts to grow again. In place of displayed strength, a season of reflection and clarity begins. It is at the limit that Samson starts to see more truthfully. In everyday life, crises also awaken awareness when faith hurts and distractions fall away. There are moments when everything collapses and only truth remains, clean and unmasked. This process reveals faith after failure, a faith that does not rely on appearance, but on inner rebuilding. This faith through suffering teaches that falls can preserve what still matters. And when clarity is born, in the most difficult moment, what is it asking to be changed before the next step? Strength restored, but at a cost. In Judges 16:28 to 30, Samson cries out to God in his final moment, aware of the losses and the cost of his choices. He prays even when God had not responded in the way he expected throughout his life, asking only for strength to fulfill the remaining purpose. There is no return to the past, no erasing of scars, but there is clear direction for the end. The text shows that restoration comes accompanied by total surrender. Samson understands that purpose can still be fulfilled, even under harsh conditions. In everyday life, many people discover second chances while continuing to wait on God, knowing that some consequences remain. Restoration is real, but it does not happen without marks, like a house rebuilt that still bears signs of the storm. This faith that heals does not deny the price paid, but transforms the meaning of the journey. God's grace in Scripture reveals that restoration is not returning to the beginning, but moving forward with greater awareness. And when strength returns with maturity, what needs to be done differently from this point on? Samson's greatest battle was against himself. The story of Samson is not about an isolated sin, nor about a sudden fall. It is about slowly loosening the vow. It is about excessive self-confidence and neglecting what sustained the calling. First, he touches what he should not. Then, he begins to move through environments that did not preserve his consecration. Next, he starts treating boundaries as details. Until the most serious moment arrives, he gives away what sustained his strength, the covenant that kept him standing. Samson had strength. He had gifts. He had a calling. What was missing was constant vigilance. And this is where the story stops being only about Samson. Because today's Samson may be someone who thinks, it's just today, nothing will happen. My faith is strong enough. It is the person who chooses to watch what they know weakens them, to go to places that do not build them up, to flirt even knowing they should not. Everything seems too small to cause damage. But this is how the breach opens. Error rarely begins big. It begins when the conscience is silenced and the boundary is relativized. The story of Samson teaches us something many people prefer to ignore. God is merciful. He forgives. He restores purpose. But he does not automatically erase consequences. Forgiveness does not mean the absence of harvest. Some marks remain. Some losses do not return. And some pains linger for a long time. This is not a lack of God's love. It is part of maturity. Boundaries exist to protect destinies, not to prevent joy. So the question that remains is not about Samson. It is about you. Where have you loosened vigilance, believing you can handle it? Which boundaries need to be respected today, before strength turns into self-sufficiency and the gift becomes a risk? The story of Samson leaves a clear and necessary warning. The greatest enemy of a calling is not outside. Many times, it is the one who carries it. If this message spoke to you, write this in the comments. I choose to stay watchful. If you know someone who has a calling, gifts, and responsibility, but has been playing with boundaries, share this video. It may be the warning they needed before something is lost. And stay here with us. The next video deepens this story from another angle. Delilah, the seductive trap that still destroys great men today.